Chapter 4 of Beyond the Rocks, a Love Story by Elinor Glyn. Theodora did not wonder why she felt in no exalted state of spirits as she dressed for dinner. She seldom thought of herself at all, or what her emotions were, but the fact remained there was none of the excitement there had been over the prospect of breakfast. Her husband, on the contrary, seemed quite fussy.
"A devilish fine woman,"
he had described Mrs. McBride.
"Acts like a tonic upon me, does me more good than a pint of champagne."
"Is she not delightful?" agreed Theodora. "So very kind and gay. I'm sure the dinner will do you good, Josiah, and perhaps we might give one in return. What do you say?" Josiah said,
"Certainly."
He could give a meal with the best of them. They would consult that father of hers who knew Paris so well and ask him to help them to arrange a regular
slap-up treat.
And so they arrived at Armenonville. It was a divine night, quite warm, and a soft three-quarter moon. Mrs. McBride had everything arranged to perfection. Their table was just where it should be, the menu was all that heart of gourmet could desire, and the company sparkling. Theodora found herself seated beside Mr. Harryman Hoggenwater and an elderly Austrian, and before the hors d'oeuvres were cleared away, both gentlemen had decided to make love to her. It was when the bisque d'écrevisse was being handed, she became conscious that, not 2 tables off, there was an empty one simply arranged with flowers, and almost at the same instant, Lord Bracondale and his party arrived upon the scene. All Theodora's perceptions seemed to be sharpened. She knew without turning her head the table was for them, and that they were advancing towards it. She had felt their arrival almost before their automobile stopped, and now she would not look up. A strange sensation, as of excitement, tingled through her. She longed to ascertain if the woman was good-looking who made the third in this party of 3. She peeped eventually, with the corner of her eye. Lord Bracondale had so placed his guest that he himself faced Theodora, and the lady had her back turned to her. Thus, Theodora's curiosity could not be gratified. "She is English," she decided. "That round-shaped back always is, and very well-bred looking, and not much taste in dress. I wonder if she is old or young, and if that is the husband. Yes, he is unattractive. It must be the husband. And, oh, I wonder what they are talking about. Lord Bracondale seems so interested." And if she had known it was, "Really, Monica, how fortunate to have secured you at short notice like this," Lord Bracondale was saying. "I only found I had a free evening at breakfast, and I met Jack on my way to the polo ground just in the nick of time." "We love coming," Mrs. Ellerwood replied. "For unsophisticated English people, it is a great treat. We go back on Saturday. Everyone will be asking what is keeping you here so long." "My plans are vague," Lord Bracondale said casually. "I might come back any day, or I may stay in till well into June. It quite depends upon how amused I am. I rather love Paris." And to himself he was thinking, "How I wish that atrocious woman over there with that paradise plume would keep her hat out of the way. Ah, that is better. How lovely she looks tonight. What an exquisite pose of head. And what are those 2 damned foreigners saying to her, I wonder? Underbred brute, the American Harryman Hoggenwater. What a name! She is laughing. She evidently finds him amusing. Abominably cattish of the widow not to ask me. I wonder if she has seen me yet. I want to make her bow to me. Ah!" For just then magnetism was too strong for Theodora, and, in spite of her determination, their eyes met. A thrill little short of passion ran through Lord Bracondale as he saw the wild roses flushing her white cheeks, the exquisite flattery to his vanity. Yes, she had seen him, and it already meant something to her. He raised his champagne glass and sipped a sip, while his eyes, more ardent than they had ever been, sought her face. And Theodora, for her part, felt a flutter, too. She was angry with herself for blushing. Such a schoolgirlish thing to do, Sarah had always told her. She hoped he had not noticed it at that distance. Probably not. And what did he mean by drinking her health like that? He was...
Now truly, Mrs. Brown, you are cruel, Mr. Harriman Hoggenwater said pathetically, interrupting her thoughts. I tell you I am simply longing to know if you will come for a drive in my automobile, and you do not answer but stare into space.
Theodora turned, and then the young American understood that for all her gentle looks, it would be wiser not to take this tone with her. He admired her frantically. He was just crazy about her, he told Mrs. McBride later, and so now he exerted himself to please and amuse her with all the vivacity of his brilliant nation. Theodora was enjoying herself. Environment and atmosphere affected her strongly. The bright pink lights, the sense of night, and the soft moon beyond the wide open balcony windows, the scents of flowers, the gaiety, and above all, the knowledge that Lord Brackendale was there, gazing at her whenever opportunity offered, with eyes in which she, unlearned as she was in such things, could read plainly admiration and unrest. It all went to her head a little, and she became quite animated and full of repartee and sparkle, so that Josiah Brown could hardly believe his eyes and ears when he glanced across at her, this his meek and quiet mouse. His heart swelled with pride when Mrs. McBride leaned over and said to him, "You know, Mr. Brown, you have got the most beautiful wife in the world, and I hope you value her properly." It was this daring quality in his hostess Josiah appreciated so much.
"She's not afraid to say anything, 'pon my soul," he said to himself. "I rather think I know my own possessions' value," he answered aloud, with a pompous puffing of chest and a cough to clear the throat. The Austrian prince on Theodora's right hand pleased her. He had a quiet manner, and the freemasonry of breeding in two people, even of different nations, drew her to talk naturally to him in a friendly way. He was a fatalist, he told her. What would be, and mortals like himself and herself were just scattered leaves, like barks floating down a current where were mostly rocks ahead. "Then must we strike the rocks whenever we wish it, or no?" asked Theodora. "Cannot we help ourselves?" "Ah, madam, for that," he said, "we can strive a little and avoid this one and that, but if it is our fate, we will crash against them in the end."
"What a sad philosophy," said Theodora. "I would rather believe that if one does one's best, some kind angel will guide one's bark past the rocks and safely into the smooth waters of the pool beyond."
"You are young," he said, "and I hope you will find it so, but I fear you will have to try very hard, and circumstances may even then be too strong for you."
"In that case, I must go under altogether," said Theodora, but her eyes smiled, and that night at least such a possibility seemed far enough away from her. The Austrian looked across at her husband. Such marriages were rare in his country, and he had thought so too in England. He wondered what their story could be. He wondered how soon she would take a lover, and he realized how infinitely worthwhile that lover would find his situation. He wished he were not so old. If she must break up her bark on the rocks, he could take the place of steersman with pleasure. But he was a courteous gentleman, and he said none of these things aloud. Meanwhile, Lord Brackendale was not enjoying his dinner. For the first time for several years, he found himself jealous. He, unlike Theodora, knew the meaning of every one of his sensations.
She is certainly interested in Prince Karolstein, he thought as he watched her. He has a European reputation for fascination. She has not looked this way once since the entrees. I wish I could hear what they were talking about. As for that young puppy Hagenwater, I would like to kick him round the room. Lord, look how he is leaning over her. It sickens me, the young fool.
Mrs. Ellerwood turned round in her seat and surveyed the room. They had almost come to the end of dinner, and could move their chairs a little. She had the true English woman's feeling when among foreigners that they were all there as puppets for her entertainment. "Look, Hector," she said. They were cousins. "Did you ever see such a lovely woman as that one over there among the large party, in the black chiffon dress?" Then Hector committed a bêtise.
"Where?"
said he, his eyes persistently fixed in another direction. "There, you can't mistake her. She looks so pure white and fair among all these French women. The one with the blue eyes and the lovely hat with those sweeping feathers. She is exquisitely dressed, and both those men look fearfully devoted to her. Can't you see? Oh, you are stupid."
"My dear Monica,"
said Jack Ellerwood, who joined rarely in the conversation,
"Hector has been sitting facing this way all through dinner. He's a man who can appreciate what he sees, and I do not fancy has missed much. Have you, Hector?"
And he smiled a quiet smile. Mrs. Ellerwood looked at Lord Bracondale and laughed. "It is I who am stupid," she said. "Naturally you have seen her all the time, and know her probably. Are they cocottes, or Americans, or Russian princesses, or what? The whole collection?"
"If you mean that large party in the corner, they are most of them friends and acquaintances of mine," he said, rather icily. She had annoyed him. "And they belong to the aristocracies of various nations. Does that satisfy you? I am afraid they are none of them demi-mondaine, so you will be disappointed this time."
Mrs. Ellerwood looked at him. She understood now. "He is in love with the white woman," she thought. "That is why he was so anxious to dine here tonight when Jack suggested Madrid. That is why he stays in Paris. It is not Esclarmonde de Chartres after all. How excited Aunt Millie will be! I must find out her name."
"She is a beautiful creature,"
said Jack Ellerwood, as if to himself, while he carefully surveyed Theodora from his position at the side of the table. Hector Bracondale's irritation rose. Relations were tactless, and he felt sorry he had asked them. "Oh, you must tell me her name, Hector," pleaded Mrs. Ellerwood. "The very white, pretty one, I mean."
"Now, just to punish your curiosity, I shall do no such thing."
"Hector, you are a pig."
"Probably."
"And so selfish."
"Possibly."
"Why mayn't I know? You set a light to all sorts of suspicions."
"Doubly interesting for you, then."
"Provoking wretch!"
"Don't you think you would like some coffee? The waiter is trying to hand you a cup."
Mrs. Ellerwood laughed. She knew there was no use teasing him further. But there were other means, and she must employ them. Theodora had become the pivot upon which some of her world might turn. The object of this solicitude was quite unconscious of the interest she had created. She did not naturally think she could be of importance to anyone. Had she not been the youngest and snubbed always? The same thought came to her that was conjuring the brain of Lord Bracondale. Would there be a chance to speak tonight, or must they each go their way in silence? He meant to assist fate if he could, but having Monica Ellerwood there was a considerable drawback. Mrs. McBride's party were to take their coffee in one of the bosquets outside, and all got up from their table in a few minutes to go out. They would have to pass the partie à trois, who were nearer the door. Monica would take her most searching look at them, Lord Bracondale thought. Now was the time for action. So as Mrs. McBride came past with Captain Fitzgerald, he rose from his seat and greeted her. "You have been exceedingly mean," he whispered. "What are you going to do for me to make up for it?" The widow had a very soft spot in her heart for Sir Beau Bracondale, as she called him, and when he pleaded like that she found him hard to resist. "Come and see me tomorrow at 12, and we will talk about it," she said. "Tomorrow?" exclaimed Lord Bracondale. "But I want to talk to her tonight." "Get rid of your party, then, and join us for coffee." And the widow smiled archly as she passed on. Theodora bowed with grave sweetness as she also went by, and most of the others greeted Hector, while one woman stopped and told him she was going to have an automobile party in a day or two, and she hoped he would come. When they all had gone on, Mrs. Ellerwood said, "I wonder why Americans are so much smarter than we poor English. I can't bear them as a nation, though, can you?" "Yes," said Lord Bracondale. "I think the best friends I have in the world are American. The women particularly are perfectly charming. You feel all the time you are playing a game with really experienced adversaries, and it makes it interesting. They are full of resource, and you know underneath you could never break their hearts. I'm not sure if they have any in their own country, but if so, they turn into the most wonderful and exquisite bits of mechanism when they come to Europe." "And you admire that?" "Certainly. Hearts are a great bore." "You were always a cynic, Hector. That is perhaps what makes you so attractive." "Am I attractive?" "I can't judge," said Mrs. Ellerwood, nettled for a moment. "I have known you too long, but I hear other women saying so." "That is comforting at all events," said Lord Bracondale. "I always have adored women." "No, you never have. That's just it. You have let them adore you and utterly spoil you. So now, sometimes, Hector, you are insupportable." "You just said I was attractive." "I shall not argue further with you," said Mrs. Ellerwood pettishly. "And I think we ought to be saying good night, Hector," interrupted the silent Jack. "We are making an early start for Fontainebleau tomorrow, and Monica likes any amount of sleep." This did not suit Mrs. Ellerwood at all. But if Jack spoke seldom, he spoke to some purpose when he did, and she knew there was no use arguing. So, with a heart full of ungratified curiosity, she at last allowed herself to be packed into Hector's automobile and driven away. "Of course he'll go and join that other party now, Jack. What did you make me come away for, you tiresome thing?" she said to her husband. "He has done me many a turn in the past," said Jack laconically. "Then you think—" But Jack refused to think. End of chapter 4.